Welcome everybody in person. Hello everybody online. My name is Greg Overmans and I'm hosting this event. I'm the marketing director here at CoPower. And to give a 2-second background, this event came because we found so many of our green bond investors came to us over the last month asking us questions, sharing their concerns and kind of looking to us for a little bit of inspiration and guidance. And so we thought, let's get some experts together to actually have a forum to talk about it. And so that's why we're here today. And so for a little bit of housekeeping items, for the people in the house here, washrooms are just behind here, just behind Toby, who's in the kitchen. And a few questions. For those people here in the room, we've got Steph and Jen, who are in the wings here, who have pads of paper and pencils. And so if you have a question, just raise your hand and they'll grab you a pen and paper. So you can write down the question, and then we essentially are going to combine those with all of the 180 people who are currently watching online to then distill those questions so that once we get to the question period, we'll group them together and ask those questions. So don't be scared to raise your hand, and Jen and Steph will flag you. But otherwise, I'm going to pass it on to Ron here, who's going to do some introductions and get this conversation started. So welcome and thanks.
Thanks, Greg. So we have a big crowd. I'm sure lots of questions. So I'm going to jump right into introducing the panel and then kind of setting the stage. So on my right, your left, we've got Keith Brooks, who's the Programs Director at Environmental Defense. You probably know who they are, but a leading Canadian nonprofit working with government, business, and citizens to ensure a healthier and more prosperous life for all. In the middle, we've got Julia Langer, the CEO of the Atmospheric Fund. TAF is an independent agency endowed by the City of Toronto and the Government of Ontario to advance solutions that reduce carbon emissions, air pollution in the GTA and Hamilton. And right beside me, we've got Jonathan Frank, Managing Director at CoPower, who is our host for today. CoPower is a clean energy investment company that helps individuals invest in clean energy projects across Canada through green bonds. So set the stage for today. We've got a new government. They've made a couple big announcements. I would start by saying none of us in this room should be surprised that these announcements have come out. They were part of an election campaign. We could be shocked about the speed with which they came and maybe how they're being announced and some of the details. And we'll get all the panels to talk about those. But just to kind of, again, let everybody know so we're on the same page. So first move was on June 19th, before the government was actually sworn in, when the Green On program website was shut down and those programs were stopped. On July 3rd, government announced that cap and trade, they were going to be pulling out and canceling cap and trade. Keith can talk to a little bit of more recent news on that. And then a couple of weeks ago on July 13th, canceled 758 renewable energy projects that had not reached NTP or notice to proceed. So 3 big announcements that impacted the energy and environment space. And so we're going to start with just setting the ground base. What do those mean? How do we move forward? And we'll turn into maybe a bit more positive discussion. So we're going to start with Keith. Keith's going to talk about the cap and trade. Certainly there was a provision in WCI for organizations or participants to withdraw. Maybe give a recent update about what that looks like, but really answering the question, how does that proceed? Get out your crystal ball and tell us, what does that look like? Legal implications. The feds have a backstop program that's going to be implemented next year, so take it from there.
So this couldn't be more timely because the government is literally tabling legislation today. It's probably going to go through first reading, probably not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe they can get it done today. It's the act to cancel cap and trade. So they already had the regulation that they passed earlier. That kind of ended the auctions. It was all of the details on the cap and trade system, but there was also an act, the Climate Change Mitigation and Low Carbon Economy Act, that kind of set out cap and trade and a bunch of other provisions. So that act is being struck down, or they're starting to strike it down today. People that are following this closely think that they're probably not going to get that act passed during this session because they've introduced it and they're probably going to rise now for a summer break, but they've tabled it now. So couldn't be more timely. And that act contains not just cap and trade, but a bunch of other things that are important. One of which is Ontario's greenhouse gas reduction targets. The province had some pretty good targets, taking us down to 80% reductions by 2050, which is pretty good targets. The Act also kind of set out that the province has to develop a climate plan, has to consult on that plan, has to report on their progress towards the plan, and then another piece that was important is that it set out that the money raised from cap and trade would go into this greenhouse gas reduction account, and that money had to be spent back on other emissions reductions initiatives. So you would have seen in the news that now schools are not getting money, and the cities aren't getting money for cycling, and homeowners might be on the hook for windows and insulation and things like that, and manufacturers are probably going to be laying people off. Those are all the things that cap and trade was funding, so the government has stopped funding those things. So the legislation that they tabled today, we haven't seen it yet. They put out a press conference saying they've tabled it, but it's not, we can't see it yet, so we don't know the details. But what they have said is that it's going to require that they have a plan, and it's going to require that they have targets. So I think those are good things. We should be positive about that. They haven't just said, we don't care about climate change. In fact, they are saying they care about climate change. They just don't want cap and trade. But of course, as you said, we're still going to have a price on carbon in Ontario because the federal government has made it very clear that any province that doesn't have its own pricing system is going to have the federal system applied. And they've also been very clear and unequivocal in their communication that the federal price will now apply to the province of Ontario.
Okay. So that's good. Again, table stakes. A lot of the programs that were going to be funded by those cap and trade dollars, obviously Green On got set up, initiated some of those programs. So Julia, maybe you can talk to specifically how do those programs impact emission reductions in Ontario. And a lot of the government is that we're trying to save money. We're trying to put money back into the pockets of everyday citizens. And does this really do that? And will you see those savings, or certainly short-term versus long-term?
Right. So one thing I would add to your list of kind of what's going on is I was just before this forum at another forum about the gas tax. And so that's another thing that was certainly a campaign promise to sort of reduce the price of gasoline by 10 cents through the provincial excise tax and the cap and trade. So there's two pieces of that 10 cents, one of which 4.3 cents of which is cap and trade. And so, there's a lot of sort of angst also about, how's that going to get unwound? It's kind of challenging. There's no particular rules on that. So, this whole unwinding is, it's going to be a lot of fodder for lawyers, I think, to figure that out. So, to your question about the Green Ontario Fund, I think let's contextualize this. Some of the cap and trade revenues, which you mentioned are set aside, were not only dedicated to Green On. So Green On was an agency set up to do some particular programs for residential and industrial emission reductions. But cap and trade money was also flowing to the schools, to hospitals, to municipalities. So it was an economy-wide redistribution of resources. So taking from the pollution, taxing pollution, so to speak, in this case, pricing it through the cap and trade system and redistributing it to solutions of a whole variety of kinds. So in particular, Green On, the impact, of course, is going to be on the residential programs. Primarily, those are the ones that had really started. And industrial programs, which had also already started looking at, small, medium-sized enterprise as well as large industry to reduce emissions. We still need that work to be done. It is in some cases what government funding can do is make the business case better. But there is a business case. And one of the concerns that we always had, especially on the energy efficiency side, was that, in some cases we were having too much government money into energy efficiency because this is an opportunity that has a return on investment. It is profitable, and sometimes too much government money, which is free money, crowds out private capital. So I think we're going to have to re-examine some of these business cases and not lose momentum. People thought that retrofits and reducing their industrial energy use and all of that were good things a month ago. They're still good things today. And so we need to find ways to move capital into those opportunities, and especially in the efficiency side where it's profitable to actually accelerate that private capital movement. On, some of the municipal programs, what's interesting, the City of Toronto just had $400 million terminated. So that was cycling infrastructure, social housing retrofits, what was the other piece? Some thermal district energy systems, et cetera. So again, we have to look at, where those things still make sense, but cities are still committed. We're seeing a sort of a bubbling up of interest, and a sort of statement of interest, City of Hamilton, there are pockets of, solid opportunity and investment and dedication to addressing this, and in particular in cities, because this is where the impacts of climate change are coming home to roost now. So yeah, it's absolutely essential that we get back onto, what are the targets, what is the plan? If it's not going to be this measure, as somebody famously said, there is no magic bullet on this issue. There's only magic buckshot. So, we're going to have to piece together still the plan, because pricing was never ever going to solve it all on its own.
And I think in the second half of today, we'll talk about some of those things that do make sense. And obviously, government incentives help to kickstart those industries, and we've seen that certainly with solar and bringing the price of panels down, and battery storage, you could argue, is on that same path. And there are things, I agree, at different levels of government, not just provincial, that we're still going to see those actions. I think now is kind of the shock of these things happening, and it is kind of getting through and figuring it out. So we'll come back to that in a second. Maybe one more downer item before we kind of move on, and Jonathan's going to talk about the cancellation of the FIT and the LRP contracts and what that does. Probably more from the investment side. Obviously, there's project proponents that are impacted, but more from a perception of, is Ontario a place to invest, and what is that?
So, obviously a very disappointing announcement that came out recently, 758 contracts being canceled. Similar to the other announcements, the context is really important. So the feed-in tariff program was launched in 2009, along with the Green Energy Act, as part of the Green Energy Act. And it was designed for some specific policy objectives. It was designed to help the province get off coal energy, which we've done. It was designed to help create as an economic stimulus. This was right after the 2007-2008 financial crisis. So there's a big element around jobs and local manufacturing. And it was designed to help spur an industry that was set to be a global growth industry. And I think all those objectives have largely been achieved, I would argue. There were 5 rounds of the feed-in tariff program, and the contracts that were canceled were the last 2 rounds, predominantly FIT 4 and FIT 5. It's important to also distinguish several milestones within a feed-in tariff project. The projects that were canceled are what are known as pre-NTP, pre-notice to proceed contracts. What that means is they had achieved certain milestones. They had received their contract offer from the government. That meant that they had likely obtained some local permits. They had done some preliminary engineering work. They had signed up building owners or farmers to use land and rooftops. Long and short, a bunch of effort, time, energy, passion that went into those projects, all 758. But for the most part, those projects should not have had equipment purchased. They should not be constructed yet. So the actual dollar impact isn't as scary as the headline might make it seem. So the people who were affected were those contract holders that were pre-notice to proceed. If your contract has notice to proceed, or it's already operational, it's commercial operation date, COD, your contract is fine. It's not at risk based on that last move by the government. So what does this mean for investors? Well, it's scary. It's not a good sign from the government, certainly. But it's also a step that we anticipated. The writing was on the wall as soon as Doug Ford started campaigning. Several weeks before that announcement came, the IESO, the Independent Electricity System Operator, started to send notice to proceed deferrals, which is sort of the sign that termination was coming next. And the industry's been working with government, with the previous government at least, and with all the various regulatory agencies and local distribution companies to move beyond the feed-in tariff program, largely because it was already going to sunset. The Fit 5 contracts were the last round. The Liberal government had already wound down the program essentially. And these are the last few rounds that were going to be built out. So what I hope here is that the government has received its sort of checkbox on its campaign promise. We said we're going to cancel contracts, and they did that. They did it in a way that minimizes impact to the industry. Not to say that people aren't impacted. I'm sure there's a lot of businesses out there that are really disappointed. An important point is a lot of those contracts were majority or at least partially owned by Indigenous groups, by municipal entities, like schools and hospitals, and by community co-ops. So this wasn't just big businesses or private enterprise, it was societal-wide. So that, I think, for me at least, is one of the most disappointing factors here. I don't think this government hates solar or hates renewable energy in general. I think they didn't like that policy mechanism, and they're going to look to start to transition that. So what's a bit scary for the industry is, what does that transition look like? What are the new regulations that are coming in? And I think the positive trend around that is there is some existing legislation or regulation rather that will allow the industry to begin to transition. And you can't argue with the falling costs of renewables and the global investment that's been taking place. It was a couple of years ago that the annual global investment in renewable energy generation surpassed that of fossil fuels. So the tipping point has kind of already happened, you could argue. In many jurisdictions, renewables are still cheaper than coal now. So I think we're on a sort of an unstoppable transition here, but this is definitely a roadblock, and it's something the industry in general and all of us as interested citizens in this community are going to need to pay attention to and see how we can come together to keep the transition moving.
So one of I think some of the common threads and that we're certainly most concerned about is it's one thing to address climate and air pollution, which is the mandate that TAF has. But what we've realized through the development of the Transform TO plan, which was the City of Toronto's plan for achieving 80% reduction by 2050, is that in fact, we can't just hang everything. We can't actually drive this agenda just on carbon, because we all care. But really, when and this is the election actually shows some of this in spades, is that what people really, really care about and think about is their job, their pension, their the price of the gas pump, their health, getting their kids to daycare on time because the congestion is so bad. And so, I think this reinforces the point that Transform TO made for us and how we're putting that in place in Toronto and Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, is that we have to solve people's problems, right? We have to solve multiple problems. So, really making sure that, energy efficiency is a perfect case. It not only helps reduce your energy demand and therefore bills ultimately, but improves indoor air quality and comfort, puts people to work. So, jobs and economic development and the spin-off effects of that. So trying to put multiple agendas together is what I really hope that we haven't lost the momentum on. That is really, the big picture. And we all need to solve all these problems together, and that we don't want to lose momentum on that, and I think part of it is a communication issue, but there's investor confidence, to your point, like we need people to be investing in this, so you need some kind of solid ground for that to happen. We need to take advantage of that technology. Those are the things that I think are, in some ways almost more worrisome than, this legislation. Sure. It's that bigger picture and how we go forward.
And I think one could argue, I'm not saying I would argue this, but certainly political change sometimes happens every 4 years. You could argue the Ontario market got a bit complacent because it had been 15 years. Certainly every 3 or 4 years, there was the threat of a change in government, but for the most part, we were down that path. Now it's changed, right? Now it is creating, if you believe in the conservative motto of market mechanisms as opposed to government handouts, then what is that model? How do you change? How do you adapt? Certainly, again, at the federal level is a different story, but maybe talk a little bit about, I think part of what the audience would love is kind of the inner circle, the conversations that are happening in your worlds from a policy perspective, efficiency from an investment. How does the industry adapt? Do we have enough details yet? Keith talked about the legislation's been tabled, but we don't know what it looks like. It was just this morning. So can individuals react at this point, or what has to happen, and what are people getting ready for in the next little while?
We don't have the details yet, right? They said they're going to develop a plan, but we have no idea what will be in the plan. I think there's an opportunity, though, for us to hopefully to engage with this government and help them develop that plan. And I think, Ontario's climate change action plan had a lot of good things in it, but there were some things that weren't so great in it. So we've got to kind of another kick at this, plan can, and maybe we can end up with an even better plan. I would hope. I think it's unfortunate because that we're having this kind of change of approaches right now, and it's happening so quickly, because I think it really has thrown everybody for a loop, and we don't know what to expect now, and that's tough for the business community, and it's tough for advocates, it's tough for the public to understand what we're going to expect here. But we are going to get another kick at a plan. So I think we should engage with that, and I think we want to look for the things, like Julie was saying, that fit with what this government says they want to do, right? They want to bring costs down. There's a lot of environmental initiatives, a lot of climate change initiatives that are going to bring costs down. It's not just energy efficiency, but the last bids for wind power brought in the cheapest form of power that Ontario has. It's cheaper than anything else in terms of new generation. And in Alberta, they had an option for wind power. They got it in at 3 cents, right? And solar's coming in for 3 cents in other parts of the world. So if you want to bring down costs in the electricity sector, renewables is probably the way to go. So you want to do energy efficiency, you want to do renewables. When we care about public health and those kind of things, and I think people here and a lot of you online know that getting rid of coal is one of the big reasons we don't have smog days anymore. And if we're going to say change our electricity sector and start increasing the use of natural gas, I don't think we're going to bring back coal, right? Coal is pretty much dead. Trump hasn't been able to bring back coal in the States, so I don't think we're going to see it come back here if we can, or in Ontario rather. But we don't want to see more natural gas either. Natural gas is not just causing climate change, but it's a pollutant, and it's causing pollution next to people's homes. That's why most people fought the gas plant. It wasn't about climate change. It wasn't about a noise. It was about they didn't want their kids breathing in that pollution. So the same thing goes. We don't want pollution. We want to bring costs down. I think there's a lot of things that we can do that are going to be better for public health, better for our economy, better for our climate. And those are the things we need to try to find and put forward to this government. Hopefully they're open to having that kind of dialogue. I also think that the federal government has said they're going to bring their price in, and Julia's point is very important. Carbon pricing was never going to do all of the work here in Ontario, right? And it really never was, and it's not going to do it federally. And I think it's unfortunate that, in the media and a lot of this public discourse, carbon pricing has become the proxy for climate action. If you're serious about climate change, you put a price on carbon. And that could be true, but there's lots of ways we can fight climate change in addition to carbon pricing. And so it's good that the federal government is going to be doing it. I think we would support that. I think we want to also have a conversation with them, though, about what they're going to do with the money that they bring in, because we do know that the money that Ontario was bringing in was going back to a lot of programs. Maybe some of those were getting too much money, as Julie was suggesting. Maybe we can optimize those dollars more, leverage more private money into the system. But, there's opportunities to give money back and fund programs from the money that the federal government raises right now. And I think we're interested in having a conversation with them about that opportunity as well, because if it's just $20 a ton or even $50 a ton, it's just not going to provoke the kind of behavior change that we need from individuals and businesses and corporations and industry and kind of all that stuff. We need, I think, carrots and sticks, and cap and trade was good at doing that. It had the stick of the pricing signal, but also the regulation of forcing emissions down, of lowering that cap each year, and then it had the carrots, and that were enticing people to renovate their homes, and for cities to put in like recycling infrastructure and all this kind of schools to retrofit themselves and social housing and all that kind of stuff. And I think we saw that those carrots are really popular, right? I mean, the demand for windows, right, is backlogged by like 6 months because people were so excited by that incentive. And maybe that we would say then, therefore we know it was too generous, but my point is that the incentives were working. They were encouraging people to finally take these steps. And we had tons of conversations with Ontarians over the last year about all of the things that the province was trying to do. And they're really excited. They actually really supported, they want to see action on climate change. They want to think about putting solar panels on their roofs or retrofitting their homes, or maybe they're ready to get an electric car, all these things. Like, the people of Ontario are really excited actually to tackle climate change. And if we give them a little bit of assistance and we help them along the way, I think we can keep that momentum going.
Yeah, so not to repeat any of that, that's all totally true. I'll just focus on a few other conversations that we're having that I think pertain to this. So number one is with investors. So globally, the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, this was Mark Carney's committee that basically said, look, information is what runs the financial sector. We need information to make due diligence decisions and underwriting, and that's how they run. And climate is a risk, and we don't have enough information about this. So, the climate carbon exposure, risk of climate change, and then the flip side, what are the low carbon opportunities as countries and industry transitions? Where can you actually make money, in this new sector and actually not lose money in this other sector like coal? So, these are meta trends that are like, Ontario is so irrelevant in this, but these conversations are happening. And it will permeate to Ontario. So, you think of the companies that are operating in Ontario, and Canada, they're going to be asked for more information by investors, by the pension funds, about their exposure on climate. These are the things that are driving, these are the conversations that are moving the dial. And, it almost doesn't matter what Ontario does. I mean, I do believe it absolutely matters, but to that investor level, it's not really actually moving the dial, but it will affect our dial. Like, I think this is going and they're going to, this will disadvantage Ontario and Ontario companies if we don't keep up with it. So, those are certain things that I think the government's going to have to, look at and consider, in order to maintain our competitiveness. The Toronto Stock Exchange, is an important player. So those are considerations and conversations that I think are happening. Very positive influence, from a sort of top down, but it'll come bottom up. Second one, I think.
One thing on that, I think it is pricing carbon as a concept. I think Ontario is material. There's a lot of debate about what happens to WCI in North America, and
from a risk,
for sure. And now I do think, as you mentioned, that's one aspect. That's not everything about climate change. That's not investment. But I think it's that peril of what happens to pricing carbon and the feds push through. And that's, again, I'd say that's a North American bubble, as opposed to, we at Bullfrog have a lot of European companies that operate in Canada. They get it. They understand it. They've lived it for much longer than we have in North America. And it's a foregone conclusion. Of course, we're going to price carbon. So that's, again, about, is it a hiccup? Is it gone forever? Does it change? We'll see. But,
but I think that top-down pressure from the investors is going to make a difference.
But what Ontario, I just quickly do it. I know you want to get back to it. What Ontario does absolutely does matter, though, right? I mean, we need to have this momentum. Climate change is a collective action problem. Everyone's going to throw that excuse of like, well, what about China? By the way, China's moving forward with cap and trade. But, what about China? And if China's not doing something, then what we do doesn't matter. But what we do absolutely matters. And it matters just because from a sense of momentum. It matters because we are Canada's biggest economy. It matters because we had ambitious targets. And if those targets are watered down, Canada's ability to hit the targets that we committed to in Paris, which incidentally are too weak, is further imperiled. We drift further away from our commitments. And then if we're not making good on our international pledges, that gives other countries an excuse. And so
I'm not trying to say it doesn't matter. It was just with relation to that reporting, that disclosure point, so it doesn't move the like on that disclosure. Obviously, it matters in terms of, what we achieve and, and what our homes, how efficient they are, and, and to the emissions from the tailpipe. Obviously, that matters. I'm just saying in the disclosure context.
I get it.
So, on the other conversation is vis-a-vis cities, and mentioned it briefly, but I think that we saw this in the United States, when Trump said we're not going to be part of Paris, is that the subnational governments really sort of rose to the challenge, and my sense is that cities mainly because they spend a lot of time thinking about this. It is where the rubber hits the road. Because of those liabilities that are, that are coming home to roost vis-a-vis, storms and floods and all of that. Those conversations are still ongoing, very positive, strong commitment, and hopefully will be influential in the Ontario context, because, municipalities, are significant economic drivers, as well as local sources of emission that are important, and that I feel that there's some positive sense that momentum will keep going.
I spent a lot of time over the last 2 weeks talking to other investors in the space, project developers of all sorts of clean energy technologies, and there's sort of two themes that I'm hearing. On the one hand, people are looking to sort of mitigate and protect what has been gained so far. So if they have operating projects, going back through their contracts, talking to their lawyers, understanding all the protections that are in place in those contracts, which are significant, and looking at other jurisdictions where similar things have happened, where there's been a change of government midway through a program, and sort of what happened. And there's lots of case law that can protect contract holders. So we really don't sort of expect any more rash moves on the government's part here. So that's sort of one piece. The second is really, and this is the more common discussion actually, is what next. And we're going to get to that a bit later, but people are already saying, well, we've now I've got this list of clients who I've already been talking to that want to go net metering. They want to put solar on their roof anyway, regardless of there being a feed-in tariff program. Because it makes economic sense, because they want to be a leader, because it's part of their mandate. And you're seeing that across the spectrum, from small businesses, homeowners, governments, schools. So that momentum is still there. And a lot of people are looking to other jurisdictions. And the feed-in tariff program was used around the world as a mechanism, but it's certainly not the only way to do things. And there's some really exciting programs in the US and other jurisdictions. Virtual net metering is really exciting, where you can have a solar project and individual homeowners or municipalities can actually subscribe to that power virtually, kind of similar to how Bullfrog works actually. So the industry is really starting to look next. What are we going to do right now to move forward? It's just happening a little bit sooner than everyone expected. So there's a lot of sort of positive energy around that. I think people are starting to say, what can we do together as an industry collectively to support each other and find ways to increase the value proposition of these different technologies. Up until now, for the most part, you had a solar project standalone, you had a geothermal project standalone, energy efficiency was its own thing. And I think what this is going to start to drive is the integration of these technologies into what eventually will be the net zero or energy positive built environment. There's a building I just learned about this morning in Amsterdam. It's a Deloitte building. It's the first energy positive building of its scale in the world. Really amazing, really exciting. And that's the kind of stuff that's possible now. The stuff works. It makes economic sense. It's more comfortable to live in a building or work in a building like that. And that's all possible without these types of government programs. Government programs help. They make these things happen faster. But I think the shift is going to be less from incentives and more towards regulatory frameworks that enable this type of policy. Right now, you're not allowed legally to do virtual net metering. Doesn't make any sense. So that's the kind of thing that the industry now needs to push for. And there's lots of examples around the world we can draw from to say it works. The grid there didn't blow up. This stuff is going to be really effective. And as far as sort of making this fit with the current government's mandate, renewable energy is cost effective. So instead of focusing on the greenhouse gas benefits of these projects, which are still there, those don't go away, focus on how these projects can save homeowners money and save businesses money. It's for the people. This is going to help people's pocketbook, and that's exactly what the government was elected on. So I think this industry can fit right into that mandate of his.
I don't know if you want to get in the conversation, Ron, but I'm thinking about conversations that are happening with utilities, for instance. They still have their incentive programs, right? They're at pains to sort of make that clear. So it's not like so that momentum needs to be continued, and whether they're sort of going to get in the game more, that sort of question. And also we often end up on panels with our colleague Kara from Plug and Drive, but the whole electric vehicle conversation is really important one, because obviously that's 33% of the well, in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, 37% of the emission profile. And I think we'll see a real drop off in terms of the volume of EV purchasing. But frankly, this is if you drive a lot, it still is cost effective, and it's cheap to fuel,
yeah.
right? So I just came from this gas tax forum, and they're obsessing about the 10 cents, 10 cent reduction, which is going to increase. Decrease fuel economy. So a 10% drop in that tax will decrease fuel economy by 3% or so. Not a good trend. But the fact is that if you bought a more fuel efficient car, in some ways that 10 cents would be irrelevant, because it far overshadows the savings. But fueling an electric vehicle is very inexpensive if you fuel it overnight, and it's about doing the math that those conversations really need to happen with people, right? Because people don't do math, right? They don't realize that full cost is first cost and second cost, and there's lots of ways to save.
Well, and instead of giving an incentive, if you don't want to do that, you could help with the financing package for electric vehicles, because for the total cost of ownership or the lifetime of the car, you do save money. The problem is that people don't have the money in their pocket that day. So there's other ways you can get around this if you don't want to give out incentives, but maybe there's ability for the federal government to put in some incentives and that kind of stuff as well.
So I know we're going to get to some questions in a second. Julia touched on it. So in the U.S., when the Trump administration pulled out of Paris, there was this "We Are Still In" movement. So it's 27 right now. It's about 2,700 organizations, states, cities, faith-based groups, corporations, individuals who've come together, and it's basically about sharing those stories of we're still doing things, we're still addressing climate change, we're still taking action, despite the fact that they're not committed to the Paris Accord. I'm not sure. I know environmental defense. Certainly, there's a petition you can sign to send to the federal government that you support climate change and carbon pricing. So there's those types of actions that we can take, but maybe touch on one. What are those low-hanging fruits that and maybe it's EVs? What are those things that you can recommend to people, companies, to take on to show that there's still action on climate change? And maybe the way you talked about it, Julie, it can't be. We would agree with this. The messaging can't just be about carbon. It's got to be about what are the other ancillary benefits, economic, environment, pollution, and so kind of a free for all. But if you can kind of point to one or two things that you could recommend to folks on the webinar here, and then we'll move into questions.
Well, my go-to is always retrofits, because they're, the multiple benefits. So they're cost effective. There's a huge investment opportunity. We, as organizations, have invest in energy efficiency retrofits, and we get paid from the savings. But it also, as I say, improves indoor air quality. It puts people to work. It generates GDP, because those savings get redistributed in the economy. So it's just one of those almost no-brainers, but it suffers from a lot of barriers, and it's about the barrier busting, where we do need. That's where government strategic support is really necessary. It's about reducing the business case, removing some barriers, and letting it go to scale. And so that's certainly one. And I think the EVs, feel that the case will get better. I mean, you have to drive quite a lot right now for the capital cost to be worth it. But there's ways of dealing with that and stimulating a very important industry in our country and province.
And just on efficiency, I would say when you talk about excess capital, the one thing that I think that did create was an unrealistic payback period. So that the ROI that companies are looking at, was so short that without those incentives,
Right.
nothing will ever meet. And I think that's the adjustment period that companies have to look back to. Oh, you can't get your money back in 18 months? Well, it's still a great project. You should still be doing it. And
Yeah.
so that'll.
And that's all across the entire spectrum, from residential to commercial to industrial. You know, there's efficiency everywhere, but people do have unreasonable expectations.
I don't have a single measure I would say that people should do. I mean, like I said, we were talking to tons of Ontarians. You know, we were knocking on doors. We did telephone town halls. And we had a bunch of people on our Facebook page. And people were excited about EVs. That's the one that people are most excited about. They're still expensive. And they're more expensive now. But if you can afford it, go for it. You know, if you're renovating a home, you got to put insulation in the walls, even if you don't have that incentive, right? You have that opportunity, a once in a generation or a lifetime opportunity. You got to do it, right? And it will pay itself back for sure. And you're probably already, you know, maybe forget on the countertops for now. Put the insulation in. That's a good thing to do. And just, you know, maybe I'll be interested to see what happens with the net metering and whether that's still a good choice for homeowners and individuals. Hopefully it is. I mean, the panels have come down and cost so much that hopefully that's a good proposition still. But I would say one of the most important things you can do is, whether you're an individual or a corporation or whatever, is just actually be vocal about the fact that we need to continue to fight climate change, and you're on side with, you know, doing that personally, what you can do, with your company doing what they can do, and with governments doing what they can do. Because I think one of the things that I'm worried about is that there's a story being told out there that the election of, you know, Premier Ford shows that, you know, Ontarians, you know, don't want to fight climate change or aren't want to be serious about this. And I think that's not true. That's not what the polling says. I don't think that's where Ontario's at. And I think it's really important, actually, that we continue to show that really we do want to deal with climate change. And that means engaging productively with the new government. They say they're going to have a plan. Let's work with them to get a good plan. And it also means making space so that the federal government knows that, you know, it's safe for them to carry through on what they've promised to do, which is to make sure that every province has pricing in place.
Yeah, I echo Keith and Julia's comments. The other thing is to look at where your own carbon footprint is, whether it's what you're eating, how you travel. CoPower did a really interesting study a little while ago about the carbon impact of your investment portfolio. It's one of the biggest parts of your footprint, and no one really talks about that. Look at what you're actually invested in. Sometimes it's hidden a few layers deep, and you realize you're supporting all these oil and gas and mining companies. So take a look at that. Talk to your investment advisor. Come talk to us at CoPower. There's lots of other options like that, whether it's the various renewable energy co-ops that are out there, like Solar Share. So put your dollars to work, dollars speak. You know, it sounds cliche, but call your MPP and tell them you really want virtual net metering, and you want net metering on your home because you want to save money on your electricity bill. And those messages will resonate. And you know, coming out to events like this helps, but you know, when you leave, go and share these messages with 3 or 4 of your friends or your family. Get the conversation going, because clearly a lot of people in this province still care about this mission that we're all on, and you know, we can't let this new government's mandate sort of sink those hopes, because you know, I do truly believe we're on an unstoppable trend here towards a low carbon economy. And we can't let this sort of set us back.
It's great.
Yeah.
You want to move to questions or?
Yeah. So on the webinar, it's Greg here again. Thanks so much for all of the crazy number of questions. Lauren's been furiously collecting, condensing, and we have a wide list of questions. So I'm going to rapid fire them as best as I can, and the panelists will take them as they come. So first one, can Ontario actually achieve its carbon targets without public policy support and intervention? How much independent private sector movement and investment is there towards clean energy and the low carbon infrastructure? Thoughts?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No. I mean, government's got a role to play. I mean, individuals have a role to play. Companies have a role to play, but government absolutely has a role to play. I mean, if we don't have policies to drive this transition, it's just not going to happen. I mean, the economics of this are starting to take shape, and it's really exciting, but economics alone isn't going to do it. And you could look at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, right? Tracks this stuff, and it's incredible, you know, how much money is going into wind and solar, how much money is going into storage and all that kind of stuff. But they'll tell you that even if those trends continue, and they're the most optimistic in terms of their projections, it doesn't get us to where we need to go. It does not cut carbon nearly fast enough. We absolutely need government intervention.
Yeah, I think part of it is a floats all boats kind of approach, right? So there's certain things that individuals can do, or some of the leading edge companies can do. Those early adopters, and those motivated companies and individuals and municipalities, for instance, can show that the world does not end if you do things differently. But in the end, you need some policy framework to actually take that to scale, to mainstream it. And then, the next tranche of, early adopters can go to the next solution, because we're not going to solve it in one round, right? This is a generational and multi-generational task that we have. So it just kind of goes with everybody playing their role.
And maybe just to add, I mean, there's carrots and there's sticks, right? The previous government, there was a lot of carrots. There was money behind those. Can you get there with just sticks? Probably not, but if that's the policy that this government goes down, then you can,
but it'll hurt.
Exactly, it hurts a little more, right?
You can. Mark Chicard, right? Is an advocate for flexible regulations, and he's saying we don't necessarily need to have pricing. The biggest thing in North America that's been done to reduce emissions is closing the coal-fired plants here in Ontario, and that was done by regulation. And there's other flexible regulations. You can get there, but what the economists say, and I'm not one, is that it's just going to cost more money that way.
Cool. Next one. Do we know what the new government's views on nuclear are? What are their thoughts on cost overruns? A lot of people have asked this question online. Thoughts?
I don't think any government has known how to deal with nuclear cost overruns. That's been the history of nuclear in the province. It sounds like they're going to commit to keeping Pickering open for the near term, so that they can do the refurbishments at Darlington and Bruce. Nuclear is a really interesting debate within the sort of environmentalist carbon movement. It is a low carbon technology, but obviously leaves a huge issue for long-term waste, and the amount of money going into it, if diverted to other solutions, I think would be far more effective. I think a lot of people would argue that we're really far down the nuclear path in Ontario, and it's going to be hard to turn that page.
Well, I mean, part of it is, you have to make choices, right? And number one, it's not clean from a radioactivity perspective, and it's not cheap. And in fact, it's extremely, extremely expensive. And so, in the scheme of things, it's crowding out other opportunities, and the cost overruns are only one piece of that. Even the projected costs are extremely high. And with new tech, the sort of plummeting cost of solar and offshore wind and distributed generation, I think we do have to make some choices. And so they've already indicated that they want to keep Pickering open longer, which has a cost compared to other options. So I think their policy has been clear. How they're going to deal with the cost and the overruns is another question.
Right.
And I think on nuclear, we're thinking as though it's like a binary choice. It's like all or nothing, on or off. In reality, the plan was to refurbish 10 nuclear reactors. You could do less than 10, but more than 0, right? There's actually lots of space in between there about making decisions. And the previous government said they had negotiated these so-called off-ramps. So in the case that there are cost overruns, the government can say, well, we're not going to go ahead and proceed with the rest of the refurbishments. I mean, we were at pains to ever find out how these off-ramps might get triggered. Maybe this government, in the interest of transparency, is going to show us what the off-ramps look like, and maybe we'll know when we should get on one, and maybe we should pursue other technologies.
Nope,
You good?
that's good.
Great. Given Ontario essentially already has a clean electricity grid, what is the focus on CO2 reduction in the transportation sector, where the pollution is significant? What kind of an impact do you think this government may have on mass transit?
So I was just, I think I mentioned it just at this gas tax forum. So there was a lot of conversation about, the solution set on transportation. And this is a source of emissions that is not going down, unlike buildings and waste and, some of the other emission sources. It's going up, and it's just steadily going up. And so we need, again, a bit of a toolbox of solutions. And so far, there has been no indication that the funding for transit is going to be changed. In fact, they said that the gas tax contribution to municipalities would go up. So, all while reducing the gas tax by 10 cents. So, that's a bit of a math challenge, but the sentiment is there. And I think everybody realizes, that one of the key preoccupations of people is congestion, getting around. And so there hasn't been any indication that transit will be affected. But we do need more than just, we also need more than just transit. We need fuel efficiency standards, from the federal level, a clean fuel standard. So, that's unfortunately been pushed back by the federal government, but we need to, really need to get on that. And it's a huge industrial growth opportunity for Canada. Different types of pricing, parking, tolls, so there's a whole suite of options, and we need to throw them all at this problem because it just keeps going up.
Well, and the clean fuel standard and Ontario's renewable fuel standard as well have actually resulted in lower fuel costs because you get more choice about what you're buying there, and the cartel kind of doesn't just control the prices on you. So these are actually going to help bring gas costs down, which is a good thing.
Well, and fueling with electricity is actually relatively cheap.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
right. I think it's unfortunate though that the campaign promises to bring the price of gasoline down, because that is of course going to encourage people to have less efficient vehicles, to drive more and whatnot. I mean, carbon pricing was meant to increase the price of those things so people do them less. Decreasing them should encourage them to do it more. So I think it might have us going the wrong way on transportation. It'll be we'll need to do a lot of other things to try to compensate for that.
Yeah, building on that, I've talked to a lot of private businesses, big and small, that are starting to install their own EV charging infrastructure and even offer their own sort of in-house electric vehicle sharing program. So this, whether government sort of helps with that or not, obviously they've taken away the incentives. People are moving ahead anyway.
Great segue. What supports? So we talked about a lot of the incentives and supports being kind of removed in the last month. What supports, incentives, and programs still exist to support home and building owners looking to install clean energy or reduce their energy use? What's still out there?
Okay, read Diana's blog. When's it coming out? TAP is just, I don't know, is it up, Diana? Yeah, so we just did a little bit of a survey roundup of what the incentive programs and incentives still available are. So I think there's at least 7 on that list, right? So
which for that we'd be happy to include that in the follow-up email to all participants, so that blog and those information can be shared.
Yeah, so these are for programs, for action programs, for the utility incentives, So I think we need to. That's part of keeping the momentum. Not that it's enough, and we need a plan, but let's just keep some momentum going. And I'm sure you have some suggestions.
Yeah, well, we definitely check out that blog. I think making that information available to everyone is probably the best thing we can do next, because a lot of that stuff is hard to find. The City of Toronto has a program called HELP, the Housing Energy
Loan
program. So it's a PACE financing program, property adjusted sort of tax-based financing program. It's been really undersubscribed from what I've heard. So that information is available on the website. There's people at the city who are experts in this, and they can walk you through how to make the most of it. So take advantage of those programs. I don't think the City of Toronto is going to pull it anytime soon, and the local distribution companies, Toronto Hydro, and all the other LDCs in your community still have energy efficiency programs to retrofit your house.
Here's a specific one. What are the prospects for energy storage in Ontario going forward? Energy storage.
So I'd say it's happening today. For certain classes of customer, there's something called peak busting. So for a Class A customer, who a majority of their electricity charge comes through the global adjustment through demand charges. So it's 5 periods throughout the year. Storage works very well for that. It's not it's an efficiency thing. We would say if those batteries are charged with renewable energy, that's a good thing. At the homeowner level, it's not there yet. I think, again, longer term, the vision is people will become prosumers, right? You're going to produce your own electricity. You're going to store it in you're going to have maybe it's not a Tesla Powerwall, but those things in your basement the economics are not there. Again, we'll see what happens with this one, but part of what drives those things is the economics, the price of electricity. California has peak pricing, not just time of use pricing. Those things will enhance the ability to use storage.
And the regulator.
Yeah, for sure. But I've heard rumors that maybe we're moving off time of use, we're going back to a flat rate. Those things are going to hurt those technologies, right?
But I think that also we're seeing it integrated with infrastructure. So interesting thing was Metrolinx was building the Eglinton LRT line. They were going to build a gas-fired power plant in Black Creek up there to create power on peak, so they could create it more cheaply, behind the meter kind of stuff. And we introduced them to energy storage companies, and the local community kind of got contacting their local MPP and said, you know what, we actually don't want a gas plant here. We'd rather have storage. Can you look at storage? And initially, Metrolinx said, well, storage is just not up to the task of what we need. We need to back up our trains if there's a power outage. We need all this kind of stuff. And we said, well, talk to these storage guys. And they eventually, through enough conversation, they realized storage could totally do the job. It was going to do it more cheaply than the gas-fired power plant was. It was going to be better for the community. And so Metrolinx not only agreed to put storage in at that facility, but to look at storage, and all the future RFPs they're doing as they continue to build out their transit build all across Toronto. So there's opportunities like that where we're building infrastructure to look at storage as a solution to the energy needs that we've got there.
And add resiliency, the stable power, backup power.
Well, it's clean. You just drop it in with the community. No one's going to be upset about that you have got a battery next to you, but a gas-fired power plant, people don't tend to like those things.
This is a specific question. Maybe you don't, maybe you do have the answer. What is the likelihood of the Prince Edward County White Pines wind farm being fully scrapped, even with turbines being up already? Any insight whatsoever? How people asked that and liked it. Just wanted to float it to you guys. Cool.
Yeah.
Probably a question for lawyers.
Any lawyers in that?
I think they said they're going to get rid of it, right?
Yeah, I was going to say.
They passed a law that says that they can't be sued for it. They're going to make some compensation to them. I think that it's probably going to be scrapped, actually, right?
It's not the first energy plant or facility that's been scrapped. Does it cost ratepayers and taxpayers money? Maybe. But my guess is that project never gets built.
Yeah.
Which also spawns this kind of thought question is how is industry responding to the actions of the new government? Like, are they complacent? Are they planning to sue? Kind of what are you hearing around the response to all these changes?
You've been meeting with some of the...
It depends on the industry. I mean, a lot of it has been made of the fact that industry's bought about $3 billion worth of cap and trade permits. And is the government going to compensate for them? Compensate them for the permits, rather. Today, they revealed that they're not compensating anybody that bought those permits. So of the $3 million or so in permits purchased, only $5 million is going to be returned. And they provided a series of rationale for why people weren't going to get their money back. I think some of the rationale they provided was justified. Some of those permits were given away freely. I don't know why you compensate somebody for that. Some of the Enbridge or the gasoline companies, they pass the cost on to consumers. So why would we now give them money that they've already taken from us? Basically, that doesn't make sense. But there was some other pieces where compliance entities had to buy permits, or speculators in the market bought permits, and now that the value of those has been erased. I think there might be some issues there. I think though that Ontario-based organizations, they're going to pick their battles. Maybe they're not going to choose to battle on this one. I think where the threat around lawsuits comes from is organizations that are outside of Ontario that have a bigger interest in other jurisdictions. And to the wind farm piece, I mean, the government passed legislation that said you can't sue us, but they can bring a challenge through NAFTA if they're connected to us in the United States. And other companies that are connected to Ontario through the WCI could bring NAFTA challenges as well. So, I mean, really, we're going to have to wait and see. Does anybody decide that they're going to fight this battle, or are they going to kind of try to work with them and maybe fight another day? Only time will tell.
Well, I mean, if you have connections with any of the parties who have purchase credits, I think the time is right now is obviously if there's a compensation, a legitimate compensation argument to be made, they're going to make it, and that's their business. But the real opportunity, I think, from companies who did participate in good faith, is to say, look, what we really want is a good climate plan. right? We want the certainty, we want the trajectory, we want to be good corporate citizens, and I think that that's my expectation right now from, some of the more progressive industry players, that there's a no-lose message for them. Which is very powerful, like maybe probably more powerful than the three of us saying, we'd like a good plan. And I think that's an opportunity to sort of pull that message together.
Great. Ontario's new government has vowed to fight a national carbon tax in the courts. How might this play out? Thoughts? Feelings?
I think they're probably going to lose, right? I mean, that's what the legal experts say. And again, I'm not a legal expert, but the Manitoba government had an opinion written up for them on it that said that the federal government has clear jurisdiction in this matter, and they would lose. So I think I'll trust that the lawyers are right, and that the government's probably going to lose on that challenge.
And I think part of it is, there's the legal and there's the political, and obviously the federal government is going into an election next year. And how what will they do with the funds if they do impose it in terms of mitigating any sort of concerns about that. There's multiple angles to that question.
Totally. And then on a similar vein, Federal Environmental Minister Catherine McKenna has said that by canceling cap and trade, Ontario has withdrawn from the National Climate Plan and risks losing its share of federal money for climate programs. She also suggested the federal government may find ways of distributing those funds directly to taxpayers, bypassing the provincial government. What support do you think Ontarians can expect from the federal government in the future on climate change?
It's early days on that. They just passed a legislation that gave them the power to bring in carbon pricing nationally. They've got a lot of latitude in what they do with the money. In provinces that said, please have your price apply here, they're going to give it back to those provinces where they've asked for it, like in the Yukon, for example. In other provinces, they've said the federal government's going to, do with whatever they please with the money, and they might give it right back to citizens, or they might spend it on programs. I think,
or some of it,
or something, or some mixture of the two. I mean, again, like with nuclear, it's not an all or nothing proposition, right? In Alberta, they give some money back in rebate checks, and they give some money into program spending. So maybe we're going to get some mixed thing. I honestly think we don't know yet, and I don't think that Ottawa has any idea yet what they're going to do. They're thinking through it, and we'll know in the next few months, basically, right? So there's an opportunity for us to try to inform that. Actually, if there's something that we'd like to see funded, I think we should try to suggest what that might be.
And both those questions highlight the importance of the next federal election too. So pay attention to that.
right?
And let's move to the cities, Ontarian cities. How do you expect cities to respond or change their plans due to the loss of financial support from the provincial government for climate change programs? Like, how can city staff help keep their councils motivated?
Well, I think they're also digesting some of this because it's just been over the past couple of weeks that a bunch of the funding was revoked. But I think what cities are looking at is what makes sense anyways. So thermal networks and district energy systems. There's a lot of developers who and for instance, in Toronto, Enwave Corporation, who are really, this is their core business. This is what they do. They know how to make that work. And, and some of the federal, the provincial funding was sort of icing on the cake. Same with efficiency programs, same with cycling infrastructure. This is the way cities are going. This is what citizens want. And so, I think it is a setback. And, as we were saying, kind of distressing, just in terms of, not having those, quite a lot of resources that people thought they were going to have. So it's a bit of a regroup, strategize and see what plans actually make sense.
And a chance to look around and see who are viable partners today. So can we leverage private investment to fill that gap? Certainly CoPower would be interested in partnering with municipalities to fill that gap, and our investors from across the country, I'm sure, would love to invest in those projects.
But I also, and I don't know at all, any details on this, but what are the conversations that the municipalities are going to have with the province, about this? The same as, what are the conversations that the large emitters will have? These are important voices in the go forward.
And cities need clean air, right? Major source of pollution in Toronto is cars. So the city's got an interest in getting us out of those internal combustion engine cars because that's an issue with pollution. It's people that are living at the 427 and the 400 and those kind of areas, like there's serious pollution caused by that. So it's not just about climate change; it's about clean air, and that's what we think this government's interested in. Cities are interested in that. We've got to keep on.
And then going even more individual, a couple people have been asking, can providers of clean energy funds still guarantee their advertised ROI? So like a 5-year percent or whatever it is that they've been selling, like what does that mean with all these cancellations?
Yeah, so come back to something I mentioned earlier, which is operating projects have robust compensation clauses in there. The one thing that I've seen from a lot of the lawyers, you can do some Google searching. Every law firm who does renewable energy has put an opinion paper out. They all say almost the exact same thing, like they could have been carbon copied. If the government tries to cancel those operational contracts, I mean, that's like a whole paradigm shifts where you can't trust government contracts. It's going to hurt the government's credit rating. They would have lawsuits coming from major banks from around the world, pension funds. So I just don't see that being an option for the government. But it's the protection that's built into those contracts. Once you're an operational project, you're protected with those contract clauses.
And then a lot of questions around what the new government's plan to tackle climate change will actually look like. We kind of mentioned like we don't know, but I mean, if you throw some darts, are we expecting any changes? Long energy framework, net metering, kind of what would you dart if you were to dart?
I mean, really, we don't know. I mean, so they said they're going to have targets. We don't know how ambitious those targets are going to be. But that's going to set the ambition of the plan. One thing we do know is that the plan is going to be not as well funded as the previous plan was. Right? We had $2 billion or so going into funding climate change initiatives in Ontario. The new government has promised, I think, $400 million over 4 years. So $100 million a year. So it's not going to be as well funded. And I think that means we're not going to see those rich incentives that are in there. They've said they were going to come down heavy on polluters, so maybe there's going to be more of a reliance on regulation. I hope that we can make an argument to them about efficiency, and about all the things that we've been talking about, that bring these co-benefits around. They're good. They make good economic sense. They're good for public health. They're popular. All those kind of things, right?
Great, guys, this has been intense. These questions have been coming. They've been great questions. Thank you so much for fielding these. And so I guess to kind of wrap up, would love to hear there are hundreds of people online, here in person, all wanting to figure out how do we move forward. So I guess from you guys, closing statements, would you like to share with Canadian Ontarians around the future, what they can do? I know we touched a little bit about individual actions, but I mean, what would the one message you want to leave everybody with? Keith.
Well, I think, as was mentioned at the top, I mean, we do have kind of a petition up there that says, tell the federal government that you support them in fighting climate change. And I think we're going to do something as well to allow people to tell the provincial government that you're interested in them continue to fight climate change, because they said that they're going to do it. So I think the most important thing we can do is show public support for continued momentum on this. We shouldn't be getting into, too much fighting and whatnot. We need to actually just show that we really want government to continue to lead in this. We want to go along with government. We need to support this agenda provincially, nationally, and I guess at the municipal level too.
Yeah. Great.
So in the philosophy and the approach and the theory of change that the Atmospheric Fund has, I think we need to demonstrate, de-risk, and scale. So we actually have to, keep that momentum. Get retrofits underway and show the value proposition and the multiple benefits. The electrification of transport. The distributed energy generation, and it de-risks it and it normalizes it and it makes it popular. I think we've been on a really great trajectory, and keeping that momentum and engaging with the government to make sure that we have a mechanism to keep it going.
Yeah, and building on those points, looking at the global trends here, I think that the cost of these technologies coming down is not going to change, and a lot of these things are things you can do at your very own home. You can do at your own business or the company you work with. So push for those changes, run the economics. It probably makes economic sense to do these initiatives anyway, and look to other ways you can make a difference, whether that's putting your investment dollars to work, or signing these petitions.
Lastly, I think the government has said, surprisingly, they've only been in for a month and lots of changes, but they're open for business. I think they're going to sit for a little while longer, and then they'll come back in the fall. And I think for everybody, it's be patient, see what happens, what comes out, what are the details, and then start those productive conversations. Things will not stop. Action will not stop. It's finding the right opportunity, and there will be opportunity. So it's finding those right things, and it might mean that the businesses, individuals have to adapt to that new world. Where I was in BC a few years ago at a wind conference right after they announced that Site C was going forward, and so there was lots of consternation about that. And Robert Horning stood up and said, "Listen, it's done. So let's not bitch about it. Let's figure out how do we move forward." And so I think there's still argument that we shouldn't lie down and say we accept all these changes, but there's a little bit of, well, let's move on. What's the opportunity? And as everyone has said, climate change is not going to stop. Economics are not going to get any worse than they are now. They're just going to get better. So find those opportunities and then adapt.
Great. I'm gonna come between you guys so that I can say goodbye to 1,100 people. Thank you everybody so much for being part of this conversation. It's been great. Everyone can expect an email after this with some follow-up things, blogs and articles that have been shared and talked about. Keep the conversation going. There used to be a hashtag on the stream, which is what happens now. Continue the conversation online. Make sure you're really being vocal as much as we can. And thank you so much. A big round of applause for all of our speakers here. For everyone in person here, stick around. There's the drinks, there's some food. Please eat, have a conversation. Otherwise, thanks so much, everyone online. Have a great day.
Thank you.